of inmates was re-established as a goal of imprisonment. But its philosophy was short-lived.
Marion had tremendous gang problems and had tremendous violence problems within their facility.
The violence escalated in Marion as well as many prisons across the country. In the late 1960s, the political culture of civil disobedience and non-negotiable demands led to more than 100 prison outbreaks in 1969 and 1970 alone. The most famous riot occurred in 1971 at Attica State Prison in western New York. 11 officers and 32 inmates were killed. Michigan State Prison in Jackson endured several riots. A series of assaults and deaths on staff and inmates occurred at Marion. The prison was put on permanent lockdown status in 1983. It became the nation's first prison to create a super maximum security unit, where incorrigible inmates were housed in a single cell for 23 hours a day. When corrections authorities around the country saw how successful Marion was in reducing violence, almost every state created high security units.
In the early to mid-60s, there was a real focus on rehabilitation and rehabilitative environments. More recently, we've moved more towards a approach to warehousing and building harder and harder facilities. In some ways, in response to what the population is we're dealing with today, and in other ways, simply in response to what public concerns are about what prisons are.
The warehouse-like structures of supermax units today have high-tech features and modern cell designs, as well as more correctional officers.
So this typically involves smaller housing units rather than larger ones. Let's say you take someone because they have a visit with their attorney or family. There would be 2 officers to accompany that inmate. And they have a walkway above the regular corridor that looks down. It's a grate. There's an officer above with a weapon and tear gas in case there's a problem. So they would actually have a separate secure corridor system that an officer will walk in to accommodate that.
Since its creation, the Supermax has become one of the fastest-growing types of prisons built in America.
I think what the public expects to see is something which clearly tells the public that they're safe, that the people that are inside aren't going to get outside. You know, if we go back historically, our hardest prisons were the walled institutions with towers, the Bastille kind of prison. Today, that's really been approached by, double fences, multiple coils of razor ribbon, perimeter detection systems.
The Supermax prisons now make no pretense at reform. That is, it's considered a quarantine to protect the staff and the inmates from their behavior.
Imprisonment today, as it did 200 years ago, means separation from the free world. But the methods of keeping that separation have become more technological and specific in design.
What we focus on when we design a prison is really security in 3 areas. Obviously, the primary mission is the security of the public. But equally important is the safety of the staff. We like to think of the staff as somebody that's sentenced there to serve a life sentence, 8 hours a day, 5 days a week, for as long as they're with the system. And finally, the safety of the inmate, which is also the responsibility of the state who's operating the facility.
What's important in prison design is that it makes it easy for officers to see inmates in a cell block. Some architects provide 3D computer animation to prison authorities before construction, so that they can confirm that the structure being built will serve their needs.
Well, one of the important things in designing a facility, a correctional facility, is for the officers, they're supposed to be supervising what is going on. The primary way we do that is to make sure they can see everything. Second thing is acoustically being able to hear. In a housing unit, we try to design these so that an officer in a unit can kind of be aware of what's going on around him just in terms of noise level, activity levels. If a fight breaks out or a scuffle, he can hear that, he can respond to it immediately.
The most common approach to maximum visual design is a central control room.
Basically, the officer is in a glass room that has remote controls and remote communication into housing units.
This design is called a pod. The officer sits at the center surrounded by cells on both sides. Surveillance cameras line the cell blocks.
As a result of the riots that were taking place across the country in the 70s, there were changes in the designing for what is the most useful number of inmates to have in any housing area, and what is the best way to arrange the configuration. And around the country, you'll see the podular units.
The design and construction of cells have also changed. Some jails, like Rikers Island in New York City, use cells that are prefabricated in a factory in Pennsylvania. They are made of concrete and steel and are delivered by truck in units which consist of 2 cells joined by a plumbing and electrical closet. The cell units are hoisted by crane into a prepared steel structure, which is the framework of the jail. The precast construction also serves as a safety feature by making it almost impossible for an inmate to break off any part of the cell to fashion a weapon. Next to the cell is a safety feature that provides security for prison staff, should the cell have a maintenance problem.
In the past, if we had a plumbing problem in a cell or a flood, we had to shut down a string of cells. This advantage allows us to work directly with that individual cell with plumbing and electrical problems without closing off cells or removing inmates out of the adjacent cells while we do repairs.
Outside, today's penitentiaries are now surrounded by a new, more lethal generation of the old barbed wire, razor ribbon wire. Usually it is surrounded by a new version of a perimeter fence that is now electronically upgraded with taut wire. The wire is double braided with a breaking strength of 950 pounds. It is attached to steel posts, anchored into the ground. It is connected to a device called a tensioner, which keeps the wires tight to 65 pounds of force. If the wires are cut or tampered with, the sensors set off an alarm. If an inmate attempts to escape, alarms will pick up a signal that goes to a central control room, which dispatches an officer.
But with the advent of technology, we were able to install electronic sensors around the perimeter fence so that now we can take the officers out of the guard towers, use their talents in other ways.
Facilities such as the Arizona State Prison in Lewis also use buried sensor cables which transmit electromagnetic energy. If an intruder is in the area, an alarm goes off instantly at the central control station. Sensors such as the microwave intrusion link can detect intruders from as far away as 1,500 feet. Despite all the high-tech devices at prisons today, inmates with time on their hands do manage to outsmart officers and technology.
You know, when I worked in Illinois, we had 3 very dangerous gang members walk right out the front door. They worked in the clothing room, and our process was to give an individual a suit of clothes upon release, and so they made clothes, and they made an extra set, and during a tour, they just joined the tour and walked right out.
Breaking into prison is almost as hard as breaking out. In many institutions, biometric devices, technology which uses parts of the body, are now in use. The hand geometry device electronically reads a handprint on a computer. The prison gate will only open for those whose handprints are in its system. Eyes can also be used to identify prison staff or inmates.
The iris scan biometric device is a device that actually takes a picture of the iris. It then looks at the patterns of the iris and correlates those patterns to a previously recorded pattern of that particular individual. If the correlation is a positive or a match, then it authorizes the event to take place, which is typically maybe opening a door.
Eyes are also part of the technology inside prisons. Correctional officers now have a way to distract inmates during a riot with a device called the Laser Dazzler. It's a bright laser light that can temporarily blind an inmate and make him nauseous. And in order to eliminate a cell search, A sophisticated detector can trace fingerprints or small particles from narcotics in a cell just by wiping a surface. But when officers are shut out of a cell block during a riot or hostage situation, they can now tape what's going on inside as it's going on with the help of television technology called a video multiplex. It can show 16 cameras at once throughout the prison. The camera system can be linked to a phone line, so if one screen shows problems at a particular location in the prison, authorities can call into that camera, hear what's going on, and communicate. Officers can also see what's going on in a darkened cell block during a riot with a device called Tiger Vision. It's a night imaging camera that allows them to record what they see without using a light. And to keep inmates under control, the latest in restraints is this Velcro ankle bracelet, which comes with a matching shoulder harness. Today, prisons can control individual cells at a central panel. Not only can correctional officers open and close cell doors by the touch of a computer screen, they can also control the flow of water in an inmate's toilet.
So we developed technology that allowed us to control how many times a toilet would flush, when it would become inactive, when we wanted to flush it from a remote location. If we felt an inmate was storing urine and feces in his toilet so that he could show it on a staff member, we could remotely flush that toilet. If an inmate has been involved in flooding the pod, we could control how many times that toilet could be flushed from a central location. So every water device could be changed individually, and we found that was helpful technology in just running the institution safer and more efficiently.
At Rikers Island, correctional officers use an electronic immobilization shield, which sends 50,000 volts of electricity to temporarily stun an uncontrollable inmate.
Prior to 1995, if there was a problem with an inmate in a cell, the method of removing that inmate was to send a 5-man probe team in and physically fight the inmate to get him removed from the cell.
Now, instead of strip searching an inmate for weapons, the body orifice security system, or BOSS chair, can detect any metal objects an inmate might hide anywhere on the body.
Innovative things like that have been a very successful tool to sending a clear message to the inmates that you can't possess weapons. If they're caught with a weapon looking through the BOSS chair system, they're charged with the crime of bringing contraband and possessing contraband in the system.
When there's a violation of a prison security system, authorities react quickly to correct it. Prison officials are also quick to change technology at their institutions when a breach of security occurs. In 1997, a correctional officer at the Arizona State Prison in Perryville was stabbed to death by an inmate who was able to unlock his cell door.
So they could actually spin the lock by just putting something in the lock, spinning it, and it released the door. After we had the incident, we went back and changed those devices. And not only at that facility, but any other facility in the state that had the same design flaw.
The Arizona Department of Corrections changed the cell locks as well as those on control room doors so they would automatically lock behind a correctional officer without a key.